hear me? Okay, I got the thumbs up. All right. Well, we're almost to the end. I got a fan club here. Awesome, I love it. Okay, so that was really, really interesting. Of course, identity access management, like I said, and Pam, it's a subject that for me is also really dear to my heart. But maybe just some takeaways that I got out of that. Identity attributes are not just about a person, but it's about the system, it's about the service, it's about the application, and how it gets permissions or rules to be able to have access to information. Identity and access management, or maybe specifically identity, is the new perimeter. I think I kind of mentioned this before, that identity is now seen also as the new firewall. And then there was a whole conversation about identity being fluid and this notion of citizen ID. I've never heard of it, so it was really interesting to kind of peer into what that means. But it means that the industry is also thinking about innovative ways that we can look to solving the problems. But then we've got to balance that out with self-governance, self-sovereignty, of how your identity is to be used. But at the end, maybe it's that you get to have control of what you want to release or how you want your identity to be used. So that was really fascinating. And then again, another theme, intersectionality between identity and the virtual world. We talked about the meta universe. And maybe the fact that we are remote and we're working remotely, it's just a catalyst towards figuring out how do we solve these problems around identity, because we have to be able to allow people to work remotely. And it's no longer, we're not confined by the physical boundaries of our office space. So maybe that is the catalyst that's going to sort of drive us into this new virtual world of thinking. And then, of course, vulnerability, intimidation, not being afraid to ask questions. Again, we heard that again. Be bold, don't internalize things, be okay to be vulnerable, and also be okay to make mistakes. So that was pretty powerful. Okay, now to the last panel. Our next feature is with Heather Ricciuto, Vivienne Suen, and Vanessa Henri, and they're going to discuss the myths of the human firewall. Welcome, ladies.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sticking around for the final panel of our two-day conference. I have to admit, this is a tough spot to be in.
I think we're literally between everyone and their awards, right?
Yes, correct.
Awesome.
That is correct. However, we will try to keep you entertained, and we're going to start off with this. Instead of telling you a bit about us, which you can read online, I'd like to start by introducing the panel by talking about why this topic is so important to the three of us, why we chose to talk about the myth of the human firewall. And I want to start with Vivienne, because Viv, this really was your idea.
Well, Heather, I came to this from a place of deep, deep frustration because I had seen so many, over the years, I've seen so many cybersecurity awareness education things and training that literally say that the user is the first line of defense. And it drives me crazy because I don't actually think that that's accurate. I think it's very true, especially because social engineering is a thing. It will always be a thing. The user is the first on the front line. They're the first line of attack. But as an organization, you do not want me as your first line of defense. On any given day, any given month, I'm distracted, I'm over or under caffeinated, I'm trying to do my job. Don't ask me to be responsible for your detection and your alerting and behavioral analysis, because I simply can't do it. I'm probably using 20% of my brain to think about whether or not I sent my kid to school with his rain boots. So don't ask me to be that alert when I can't even send my child to school in weather appropriate wear. I'm hoping somebody finds that relatable. I'm not really a terrible parent.
How about you, Vanessa?
Well, I wanted to join this panel because I keep hearing, that security is everybody's responsibility. And I think it's not that it's untrue, but it's really being thrown out there without a lot of thinking. So what's responsibility? Do you mean legal liability? Because that's not the case. Do you mean that everybody should add this to their list of role and responsibilities? Because there's no more space on mine. So, and I completely feel you. I'm like, oh, here's another thing I gotta do too, right? So it seems to me that the message I'm getting is a little bit like I'm pushing my things to somebody else. And I think it's time that we have that real conversation when we come together and we say, well, how far can we shovel that cybersecurity thing? And if it fails at the first line, who's the second line? Nobody knows that, right? So I think that discussion about the myth of the human firewall it's truly needed as a call for action.
And we're going to get to that call to action at the end of our talk. So for me, I'll share with you that I'm very, very passionate about building cybersecurity awareness amongst people of all ages. And part of that mission really is dispelling all the myths that are out there about cybersecurity, from what kind of degree you need to have to get into cybersecurity, what kind of roles there are in cybersecurity, and it includes this myth of the human firewall. So now, before I get into a couple of questions that we're all going to attack, I want to talk about exactly what a myth is. So a myth, by the way, in case you don't know, is a narrative that we develop about an unexplained phenomenon. What we do is we develop a story, a believable story, something that we're comfortable with. And if we tell it to enough people and they believe it, it somehow becomes truth, right? And so one of the most popular myths in cybersecurity is indeed this notion of the human firewall, and that we somehow, as humans or end users, are the first line of defense, as you alluded to, Viv. And so we three believe very strongly that we as cybersecurity professionals need to dispel this myth, particularly amongst leaders of organizations. So with that, Vivienne, I wanted to start by asking you, how do you think this myth has manifested itself in the profession and, frankly, organizations of all types and sizes? And how has it become so prevalent?
I think that there's some very obvious anti-patterns that are easy to spot once you think about it. Here's a hint. If you require your users to change their password every 30 days, and it has to be 16 to 20 characters long, and can't have dictionary words, and has to have the blood of a virgin and a gang sign in it, you're relying on them to be a human firewall. Strong passwords are important, and changing passwords frequently is important. Get a password manager. We've heard so much these last 2 days about credential management. If you are looking at this and you're not providing your users with a password manager, you're asking them to be a human firewall. The organization that I worked for not only gave us a good password manager, but they also gave us the family account as part of our corporate subscription. And I thought that was a really nice move. I already paid for it personally, so bad timing on my part, but that was a really nice move because that was that recognition. And here's a second anti-pattern. Hey, we all work from home now. So how many organizations in the beginning of the pandemic scrambled to give people laptops, and how many, some did, not everybody. Some organizations kind of left it up to people to sort it out with their own devices for weeks and months, right? And then of those organizations who maybe they gave you a laptop, maybe they gave you some money for high-speed internet access, but how many organizations went and trained their users on how to configure their home routers for maximum security? How many people made sure that people understood that most modern routers and mesh networks have guest Wi-Fi, and you should be enabling that for anybody who's not an actual resident of your home? I'm going to bet that very, very few people did that, because this is something I'm super passionate about. I talk about it very frequently. We don't pay attention to home security, and the stuff that's out there in the consumer market for us to secure our homes with is really far behind enterprise security. But now, in this new hybrid remote model, how much are you asking your users who work from home to be a firewall between their home network and your enterprise?
Well, and what about all the organizations that didn't equip their people with laptops, and they just allowed them to access their networks with their own personal devices that maybe aren't even really registered on their networks, right?
May not have updated patches.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So how do we deal with that?
Well, it has to start with dispelling the myth, right? And we've heard a lot of people talk about different strategies for security. We've had several sessions on zero trust security. And I think that the overarching message has to be that you need layered defenses. First of all, I can't stand any of those castle and moat perimeters because they metaphors. It just doesn't apply anymore. And when people say things like identity is the new perimeter, yeah, that's absolutely true. From an IT security point of view, all of those bring your own devices are out in the wild. All of those at-home users are out in the wild, and you have to treat them as such. Your organization perimeter is wherever your people are, and your control points are still on people's kitchen tables. So they literally are, right? Especially if you have people who work in like energy and utilities or any kind of industrial organization, you've got control points on people's kitchen tables still. So what you have to have is layered defenses. Everybody's got something around identity. Maybe it's awesome, maybe it's not, but you've got something. Everyone's got something around antivirus and endpoint. Everyone's got something around monitoring. Even if you don't have a SIM, you might have an IDS or something. You've got something. Understand how you can layer them together so that if something gets past the user, are you monitoring their endpoint? Can you detect it there? If it gets past that point, what can you pick up on the network? Can you detect lateral movement? What do you have finally around your data? Because when people are attacking, that's what they're after, is your data. They're not there to screw around with your printers, right? They're not there just to mess up your applications, although that causes a lot of chaos. Sometimes it's a good distracting technique. They are after your data. So finally, your last line of defense is where I would argue people need to invest more, because in my experience, most people don't do ongoing data classification and discovery. They don't really understand how the data moves around in the organization and where it can drift to, particularly if they're part of the stampede to cloud. So that's what I mean when I say layered defense, and you have to have compensating controls. So if the tech fails, what non-technical controls do we have? Where do our processes support? And again, are those processes completely manual? Because that again puts the onus on the user.
Vanessa, why do you think this whole myth of the human firewall is dangerous?
On top of what she said,
It's a lot, I'm sorry.
no, but I mean, from a security perspective, it's dangerous because what it does is that I think it pushes you to do things manually. We're not saying everything that you cannot automate and everything that you cannot do with technology, then see how humans can compensate. That's not really what we're saying either. You know, so when we're saying the human firewall, we don't even say that there are any implication of efforts to make. You have a human firewall, just train them, right? So I think I'm going to go back to the legal point of view, and what I'm saying here is that the employees are not responsible under the laws. Not at all. You know who's responsible? The board of directors. The board of directors is responsible. They are accountable. That's the right term. And then they can delegate the responsibility, but never their accountability. At all times, they must demonstrate that they are acting with competence. And competence is not to delegate to somebody who doesn't have any competence to do it, right? So I think it's a dangerous slippery slope in terms of accountability, in terms of leadership, and in terms of truly understanding what people are capable of and capacity planning. So it's a question of system thinking. If your employees are stressed, overworked, they're already billing overtime, they are way more likely to click on something they shouldn't click. When I'm tired, I'm more likely to eat chocolate. That's how it works, right? So we're more likely to fall into the trap that other people will set. We're more likely to go from the honeypot. We're more likely to be less vigilant. And we're more likely also to take shortcuts. And that's what's dangerous. Most of the security risks come from a bad engineering where the user is not at the middle of it. But how can the user be at the middle of it if you're asking him to be at the perimeters? So there is kind of the issue with that is that it drives the board of directors who are not security experts towards a vision of things that they are not liable for it. And that doesn't help anything moving forward after. So it's not to say that you should stop training all of your employees. That's not what we're trying to say here. But what we're trying to say is that you need to take ownership of your program and understand that your employee, they have a limited capacity in terms of delivering, both mentally, physically, and in terms of their own competence as well.
Absolutely.
And if this really is an unfair burden, as we're saying it is, or, purporting that it is, what is a better alternative?
Well, Heather, I know that you definitely have a point of view on what cybersecurity awareness can and should look like, right?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. As you know, I've done a lot, particularly with young girls, trying to teach them about how to stay safe online. But I still struggle, frankly, with how do we educate everybody? How do we educate our family and our friends not to click on that link that they shouldn't click on? So, for example, a member of my family recently got a message from a cousin saying, look who died, and there was a link, and she fell for it, And it's so, like you said, it's so easy to do. It looked legitimate. It was from a family member. How do we teach our family and friends not to click on those things? And how, in particular, how do we teach our not just our children, but our elderly family members who we've put devices in their hands, tablets, cell phones, for our sake, to make our lives easier so we can contact them when we haven't heard from them and we're worried about them, right? And we teach them how to do things like use Zoom, especially during the pandemic. So then they, we do this, like I say, to make their lives and our lives convenient, and yet we don't fully educate them, or even if we try, they don't really get it, right? They don't understand the risks.
It may be an unpopular opinion, but I actually think that you can't teach everyone in your life. I've tried. My mom asked me last week, should I get on Instagram? And I said, no, just please don't. I'll send you my photos, please don't. I think it was Sivan yesterday who talked about making your employees effectively the CISO of their home office. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant. Give them the training. Say, okay, you're working from home. Here's some home network security 101, right? And I think that's fantastic. I think everybody should do that because that is what I do. I am the CISO of Casa Viv and have been since March 2020. I'm also the chief cook and bottle washer. That's a whole other discussion. But I am the CISO of Casa Viv, which means the babysitter, the cleaning lady, the relatives, the friends, they all go on the guest Wi-Fi network. They don't get the actual Wi-Fi network that my NAS and my computer and all of our devices are on. Then guess what? That's microsegmentation at home. Yay. So I've done that because I work in this industry and I knew that I could do that. And then I'll tell people, hopefully some of you will go home and do that. If you have an Orbi, it's super easy to do. But I can't be responsible for everyone in my life. So much as it pains me, I think I just have to sit there and eventually tell my aunt, yeah, no, maybe you should stop using Facebook if this keeps happening.
Yeah. Any additional thoughts, Vanessa?
Well, I think if we want to fix this, the first thing we need to think about is controlling the decision-making process that humans have in mind, right? It's not because you showed me not to click on an email, I'm going to stop clicking on it. I'm very stubborn. So I need a little more than this, right? And, the emails, the contests at work, maybe they're not enough. But you know what? If you put a big banner that says external email in red, I may look more closely, right? So you need to understand the psychology of your employees, how they work, what's their path to that threat vector, and how can you stop as many as possible on that threat vector? Because if you don't do that, the message you're also sending to the next generation is that that digital space that is becoming the metaverse and their entire life is not a safe place. It's not a safe place for them to talk. It's not a safe place for them to trust people because they have to be defending. And while they're defending, they're not growing. They don't learn, and they don't learn to trust each other, and they don't create the meaningful relationship that they need to have. So we don't want to create a space that is dangerous and tell people that they're responsible for guarding it. This is not medieval time. What we want to do is put a society that is as safe as possible, and then have some red flags that comes to the face of people when they can see it, so that it becomes so obvious that if you're not doing it, then something that you misunderstood. So this is where your awareness training becomes useful, because now you told them, if you see that, don't do that, right? So that's very useful. But if you put things in abstract, it's very difficult. And you can't have people constantly walking like this. And do you know how many emails I receive per day? More than 200. If I was to go through each of them, because we don't have a spam filter, and trying to see, is that legit or not, I don't think I will have time to answer any of them.
Yeah.
But when you do something like, put a warning that it's an external email, at some point, don't people potentially become blind even to that? Because it's like they just see it all the time, so it's no longer a warning sign to them?
I guess you have to combine different things, right?
Yeah.
You have to understand that psychology will continue to move and move and move as the generation move. Like for my son, he understands, maybe he's heard too much about it to me, but he understands cybersecurity. He confuses password and passport, but he knows he needs one. That's all he knows, right? So it wasn't hard for him to remember that.
Yeah, I think certain things do become habitual over time, right? You need your users to develop that mental muscle memory. So, the external emails, and if they get to a point where just reflexively you slow down a bit and take that time to pause and think a little more about an external email from a user you don't know, you've done your job. Right? You've done your job without telling them 3 times a year or 1 time a year, whatever it is, you are the first line of defense. You've done your job by helping them to develop those habits. We talk about cyber awareness and being savvy, right, as an internet user. So you need to do things like that will help your users develop the habits.
And what are your thoughts on cybersecurity training for employees? So, for example, many organizations do it once a year. Is that enough?
No, it's not enough. Just, it's cybersecurity awareness. Because we conduct our entire lives on the internet, we carry the internet in our pockets now, right?
We do.
So how can you say that this awareness is a once a year ticky mark, like an audit or in the data governance talk, they're talking about how you have to have an ongoing, evolving roadmap. It's not a point in time, yay, we're compliant, and we have to move on and not do anything until we get breached again, right? It's the same thing with awareness. It's about learning those habits and training people to a healthy level of vigilance that keeps the internet a safe and productive place for us to live, work, and play. I mean, that's the goal, right? That's the point of all this technology, is this bright, shiny future we're supposed to have. And I'm a technology optimist. I genuinely believe that we're going to have this bigger, brighter future because of IoT and the metaverse and all those things. I don't think my mom is necessarily going to participate in it, but that's okay.
We probably don't want mom participating
No,
in it.
I really don't. It's going to totally screw up my Insta aesthetic. And, but, you need to find ways to train your users and the people in your domicile. In my Casa Viv, I try to train my husband and my son to have that healthy level of vigilance and those good habits. And I will admit that in my husband's case, it was a few months of shaming and teasing before he caved and started using the password manager. I was leaving obnoxious sticky notes on the mirror and on his, anyway, it was really terrible. It was quite the campaign of terrorism, but I won in the end. And I can do that because I'm the damn CISO of my house. I joke about it, but you have to kind of get people into that habit. Change is hard, right? And change that is auxiliary to for your job is really hard. It's a pain in the butt, right? And people talk about security being no. Most of the time security is do this differently, which sucks. But if you can introduce, at a user level, frictionless controls that help them develop the right habits, then you're helping and protecting your user community instead of pushing this responsibility onto them.
And I think you have to make the difference between awareness and training, right?
Right.
Explaining to people what a spam is, that is not a training. It's like saying, I know that, if you go to the gym, you'll be healthy. That's awareness. Going to the gym, that's training. The step between both, one doesn't follow the other. For many people, me included. So if you want people to train, you can tell them 1 billion times. Everybody here knows that it would be beneficial for them to go to the gym. Do we all go? Did we all go this morning? No. So knowledge is not enough. People have to actually want it. They have to have an interest into it. And that means they're not all going to want the same thing. And they're going to want something that's relevant to them. So how about you give them back ownership? So one of the best ways you can learn something is to teach it to somebody. One of the best ways you can find the right way to do it for you is to be involved in it. So you can't, you as a board of director, teach somebody that you've never met doing a function you don't know how to do with tools that you don't know what they are, how they should be doing their job. That's not going to work. So I think we just have to understand what is awareness, and that's necessary. Yes, we have to do it once a year. There are new employees. Some notions have to be known, but training as a space too, and that training is not going to go the same way for me, for Heather, for Vivienne, and definitely not for your husband. Maybe you needed a little bit of an intense training.
Yeah, so I love the fact that at this conference there's been so much discussion about diversity and inclusion, particularly around how we do cyber education. And Belinda McKickern made the point that, you know, it's got to be diverse. You have to understand, you know, the perspectives of everybody, of the people with disabilities, of the people who, you know, might be coming from a lower income neighborhood and they don't have a private room in their house they can work from. And you have to make all of these things accessible, and you have to really understand the dynamics of your workforce. As a cybersecurity architect, I'm a huge fan of adaptive tools because they create the most frictionless experience for the user right now. You know, for example, adaptive access in identity and access management, it only throws the MFA challenge if you're doing something weird. If suddenly I'm accessing from a device I've never used, or, you know, suddenly I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, when usually I'm in Montreal, right? That's an anomaly, and that's when it'll throw the challenge. And that makes sense, right? If it's legitimately me, I get it. I'm doing something unusual. I have to answer an extra question. Don't make me respond to 3 challenges every single time, right? And the technology does that now. 5 years ago, it didn't. But now, MFA and single sign-on, those are table stakes now because the technology is there, and it's affordable, and it's deployable, and we can make these things work a heck of a lot easier than we could 5 years ago.
Share a funny story. It was tax season, right? Well, our tax deadline was April 30th. And, well, when it comes to MFA and security questions, I like to get clever, right? Because a lot of security questions are so common. Like, what was your least favorite food as a child? Well, what was your least favorite food? It was probably broccoli, spinach, or Brussels sprouts, okay? So what do? I choose my favorite food, which not many people know. Well, do you think I remembered that I actually did that? No. So I got locked out of my account because what did I try? Brussels sprouts, spinach. Yeah. So don't get too clever for your own self is my lesson to all of you. And then I was reminded when you were talking about cybersecurity awareness that when I work with young girls and talk to them about cybersecurity awareness, one of the things I always tell them is don't connect to free Wi-Fi when you go to Starbucks or McDonald's or wherever. How many of you were looking for the Wi-Fi password here? People were at a cybersecurity conference and you all wanted to connect to the free Wi-Fi. And
Don't do that at Black Hat. Do not do that at Black Hat.
If we go back to the first point is, if you don't want me to connect to free Wi-Fi, then maybe you should pay for my phone and maybe you should give me a decent plan.
You should pay for my data.
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think what I've been hearing here this afternoon is that there's clearly a gap between reality and myth. So, Viv, what can we do as cybersecurity professionals to mind that gap?
Okay, so the part of that I want to focus on, I think you guys all have your own point of view on it as well, but what I would really wrap up in a call to action is that cybersecurity professionals and cybersecurity leaders need to really dispel this myth. You need to take responsibility for those layered defenses. Take a look at your security controls. Understand how much you're pushing onto the users. And you know, sometimes with legacy systems, you don't have a lot of choices, but this is a really strong argument for modernizing those legacy systems because it's a huge security exposure. So anyone who is in a position to make decisions about security architecture or security tools or security strategy needs to understand there's no such thing as a human firewall. Your users are not these insider threat boogeymen you have to worry about. They're also not your first line of defense. They are your people that you have to protect and support and help teach these good habits to.
I would say two things. Number one, if you design things user-centric, you will solve a lot of your issue. Your privacy issue, your security issue, your human firewalls issue. Just make it easy for people. And I would say, ask the board to go and start from the morning of somebody's lifetime, somebody's career, and say, how many apps do you need to open? What do they have to go through to actually be able to do their job? You know, just switch people up so they can understand that. So if you build something user-centric, you're going to solve a lot of your issue. A lot of the risk come from trying to go around because this is too complex. So the other day I wanted to log in into something, and I was into my 5th multi-factor authentication because I have one on my phone, one on my LastPass, and then one on this, and then one on this. And then finally I got through it, and then it asked for it all over again. And the first thing I thought is, oh, maybe I can just go around and go this way, it'll be faster.
I'll just put it in Dropbox, right?
Yeah.
This is what causes shadow IT. Yeah.
Exactly, because we're smart, that's what we are. We want to save, we want energy, we want to work smarter. We have just so little willpower in a day. We don't want to use it for that, really, not at 5 p.m. And you'll see the hackers are very good for Friday night, Friday at 5, Friday at 4. That's not for nothing, there's a reason for this. Lawyers are trying to have a weekend, and security people too. And the last thing I'm going to say is be careful with your words, because we know what we mean between security experts, but people who listen don't. So when we say that employees are the first line of defense, then people will interpret this in all kinds of ways. Like when we say cybersecurity or the cloud, these are very hard to understand for, like, never mind the board of directors, just think about the judges that are trying to follow, you know, and they're trying to put laws in place. So just be very specific. In reality, they're the first line of attack. If we're lucky, they're going to be able to defend themselves, but it's not their responsibility, it's mine. And then they're mostly the last line of resort when it comes to defending.
So something you said reminded me of something that's been happening to me these past 2 days. I don't know about the rest of you, but I've been getting numerous phishing calls. And I'm thinking it's because it's all over the internet. It's all over LinkedIn that I'm here at a cybersecurity conference. So I was like, let's target Heather. Has that been happening to you?
No, but I will tell you that it's a known. We saw this in our threat intelligence report that IBM did this year. Phishing attacks are up to 3 times more effective if they're followed up with a phone call. So you don't click the links, and now they're calling you.
And now they're yeah. It's like, yeah, when the same phone number, you know those numbers that start with the V, I'm like, yeah, you really think I'm going to answer that? No. So any final thoughts? In fact, one thing that comes to mind is that we haven't talked about really when it comes to employee training is we need to make it penalty-free, right? Some of the things we do, I think, make employees feel like they're going to be penalized, and in fact, sometimes they are. You know, you do one of those email campaigns
right,
to try to
you fish your own employees.
Exactly, fish your own employees, and they click on it, and then they get, you know, their wrists slapped.
I'm totally guilty of this. About 4 years ago, that it happened at work. I almost clicked on the link because I was like, yeah, I want a new laptop. And then at the last minute, I held back. And then one of my teammates had clicked on the link, and I teased him about it for months. So that, and I should not have, right? That was not cool that I did that. It has to be a penalty-free environment. You have to give people space to make mistakes. Otherwise, how will they learn better habits? If you tell your kid he's not allowed to fall off his bike, he's never going to learn to ride the bike.
Or he's not going to tell you.
Or he's not going to tell you, and then this is exactly what my child would do. Oh my God.
Anything else to add, Vivienne?
what else? I'm trying to think if we hit everything that we did today. I know we only have a couple minutes left, but you made the point earlier about, don't ever sign up for it. Don't ever join the Starbucks 5G Wi-Fi. If you don't know what a pineapple is, I have a story about how people can hijack your phone by spoof tricking you into joining fake Wi-Fi networks. So if you see me around, ask me to tell you the pineapple story, and hopefully we can break people of that habit.
Vanessa?
I would say my final word is, when you do these phishing tests, so they're like, this is not Johnny's score. This is your organization's score, your score as a CEO, and the board score. So take accountability, and you see that you will tackle things differently. Because we have to stop saying, well, that employee did that, that department did that, or that subsidiary is not doing so well. No, you're not doing well, not them. You're not doing well. You're the one that will get sued if it goes wrong, right? And it's, like we say, it's your circus. You need to put rules in place. You need to make sure that things work. And if the rules are not working, then something else is going to go. So are you giving them the right tools? If your employees are always on the road, have you thought about giving them a portable kind of Wi-Fi device? Have you thought about giving them more data on their phone, about making sure that they can actually work in the circumstances that you're asking them to work into? And do you recognize the difficulties that this poses for them or for certain classes of employees within your employee? So again, diversity of thought will lead to better training and awareness, and just listen to your employee because they know better and they want to talk, and they can teach themselves a lot of things if you just give them the control over how their cybersecurity should be handled. And they can give you a lot of feedback about, just call somebody and say, what really frustrates you today? And one person on two will give you an IT problem. It's really not hard to get feedback, but nobody wants to get it. So go around and get feedback, and you'll understand where the pain points are, and start working with this, and you'll see employees will be more willing to work with you on the cybersecurity aspect.
All right, you heard it here, folks. We're counting on all of you to help us to dispel the myth of the human firewall, and everybody's going to go home and what? Install a password manager. Yeah, and segmentize their
and
home
micro-segment
networks.
your home network. Like, if you can pay for Spotify, you can pay for a password manager. There's a lot of good ones out there. Please do it.
It's like $4 per month, like half a coffee at Starbucks where you get the free Wi-Fi.
Yeah, so that your family members no longer use the same password for everything, or put all their passwords on a sticky note or on their phones. Yes, exactly. All right. Thanks, everyone. I want to thank Vivienne, thank Vanessa. Thanks for sticking around. And I think now I'm passing it back over to the team to announce awards. So let's go, ladies.